self and individuality. Does not death dissolve the individuality of a person so that there can be no rebirth, just as the rivers, discharged into the ocean, lose their individualities? But when the waters evaporate and return as rain on the hills, they once more flow in the form of rivers and fall into the ocean. So also the individualities, during sleep, lose their separateness, and yet return as individuals according to their samskaras or past tendencies. Even so, it is in death, and the individuality of the person with samskaras is not lost. How can that be? See how a tree whose branches have been cut grows again? So long as the roots of the tree remain unimpaired, the tree will continue to grow. Similarly, the samskaras, which have merely sunk into the heart on death, but have not perished for that reason, occasion rebirth at the right time. And that is how jivas are born. How could the innumerable jivas in the wide universe, whose existence is correlative to that of the jivas, sprout up from such subtle samskaras sunk in the heart? Just as the big banyan tree sprouts from a tiny seed, so do the jivas in the whole universe with name and form sprout up from the subtle samskaras. How does individuality emanate from the Absolute Self, and how is its return made possible? As a spark proceeds from fire, individuality emanates from the Absolute Self. The spark is called the ego. In the case of an ajnani, the ego identifies itself with some object simultaneously with its rise. It cannot remain without such association with objects. This association is due to ajnana, whose destruction is the objective of one's efforts. If this tendency to identify itself with objects is destroyed, the ego becomes pure, and then it also merges into its source. The false identification of oneself with the body is dehatma buddhi, or I am the body idea. This must go before good results can follow. How am I to eradicate it? You exist in sashupti without being associated with the body and the mind. But in the other two states you are associated with them. If you were one with the body, how could you exist without the body in Sushupti? You can separate yourself from what is external to you, but not from that which is one with you. Hence the ego cannot be one with the body. This must be realized in the waking state. The three states are studied in order to gain this knowledge. How can the ego, which is confined to two of the states, endeavor to realize that which comprises all the three states? The ego in its purity is experienced in the intervals between two states or between two thoughts. The ego is like a worm, which leaves one hold only after it catches another. Its true nature is known when it is out of contact with objects or thoughts. You should realize this interval as the abiding, unchangeable reality, your true being, through the conviction gained by the study of the three states, Jagrat, Svapna, and Sushupti. Can I not remain in Sushupti as long as I like and also be in it at will, just as I am in the waking state? What is the jnani's experience of these three states? Sushupti does exist in your waking state also. You are in Sushupti, even now. That should be consciously entered into and reached in this very waking state. There is no real going in and coming out of it. To be aware of Sushupti in the Jagrat state is Jagrat Sushupti. and that is samadhi. The ajnani cannot remain long in sushupti, because he is forced by his nature to emerge from it. His ego is not dead, and it will rise again and again. But the jnani crushes the ego at its source. It may seem to emerge at times, in his case also, as if impelled by prarabdha. That is, in the case of the jnani also, for all outward purposes, prarabdha would seem to sustain or keep up the ego, as in the case of the ajnani. But there is this fundamental difference, that the ajnani's ego, when it rises up, really it has subsided, except in deep sleep, is quite ignorant of its source. In other words, the ajnani is not aware of his sushupti in his dream and waking states. In the case of the jnani, on the contrary, the rise or existence of the ego is only apparent, and he enjoys his unbroken transcendental experience in spite of such apparent rise or existence of the ego, keeping his attention, lakshaya, always on the source. This ego is harmless. It is merely like the skeleton of a burnt rope, though with the form. It is useless to tie up anything. By constantly keeping one's attention on the source, the ego is dissolved in that source like a salt dhow in the sea. What is the significance of the crucifixion? The body is the cross. Jesus, the Son of Man, is the ego or I am the body idea. When the Son of Man is crucified on the cross, the ego perishes. And what survives is the absolute being. It is the resurrection of the glorious self of the Christ, the Son of God. But how is crucifixion justified? Is not killing a terrible crime? Everyone is committing suicide. The eternal, blissful, natural state has been smothered by this ignorant life. In this way, the present life is due to the killing of the eternal, positive existence. Is it not really a case of suicide? So why worry about killing, etc.? Sri Ramakrishna says that nirvikalpa samadhi cannot last longer than 21 days. If persisted in, the person dies. Is this a fact? When the prarabdha is exhausted, the ego is completely dissolved, without leaving any trace behind. This is the final liberation, nirvana. Unless prarabdha is exhausted, the ego will rise up as it may appear to do in the cases of jivan muktas. Self-realization. How can I attain self-realization? Realization is nothing to be gained afresh. It is already there. All that is necessary is to get rid of the thought, I have not realized. Stillness or peace is realization. There is no moment when the self is not. So long as there is doubt or the feeling of non-realization, the attempt should be made to rid oneself of these thoughts. They are due to the identification of the self with the not-self. When the not-self disappears, the self alone remains. To make room, it is enough that the cramping be removed. Room is not brought in from elsewhere. Since realization is not possible without vasanakshaya, how am I to realize that state in which vasanas are effectively destroyed? You are in that state now. Does it mean that by holding on to the self, the vasanas should be destroyed as and when they emerge? They will themselves be destroyed if you remain as you are. How shall I reach the self? There is no reaching the self. If the self were to be reached, it would mean that the self is not here and now. but that it is yet to be obtained. What is got afresh will also be lost, so it will be impermanent. What is not permanent is not worth striving for. So I say the self is not reached. You are the self. You are already that. The fact is you are ignorant of your blissful state. Ignorance supervenes and draws a veil over the pure self, which is bliss. Attempts are directed only to remove this veil of ignorance, which is merely wrong knowledge. The wrong knowledge is the false identification of the self with the body, mind, etc. This false identification must go, and then the self alone remains. Therefore, realization is for everyone. Realization makes no difference between the aspirants. This very doubt, whether you can realize and the notion I have not realized, are themselves the obstacles. Be free from these obstacles also. What is the use of samadhi, and does thought subsist then? Samadhi alone can reveal the truth. Thoughts cast a veil over reality, and so it is not realized as such in states other than samadhi. In samadhi there is only the feeling I am, and no thoughts. The experience I am is being still. How can I repeat the experience of samadhi or the stillness that I obtain here? Your present experience is due to the influence of the atmosphere in which you find yourself. Can you have it outside this atmosphere? The experience is spasmodic until it becomes permanent. Practice is necessary. One has at times vivid flashes of a consciousness whose center is outside the normal self and which seems to be all-inclusive. Without concerning ourselves with philosophical concepts, how would Bhagavan advise me to work towards getting, retaining, and extending those rare flashes? Does abhayasa in such experience involve retirement? Outside. For whom is the inside or outside? These can exist only so long as there are the subject and object. For whom are these two again? On investigation, you will find that they resolve into the subject only. See, who is the subject? And this inquiry leads you to pure consciousness beyond the subject. The normal self is the mind. This mind is with limitations. But pure consciousness is beyond limitations and is reached by investigation as above outlined. Getting, the self is always there. You have only to remove the veil obstructing the revelation of the self. Retaining, once you realize the self, it becomes your direct and immediate experience. It is never lost. Extending, there is no extending of the self, for it is as ever without contraction or expansion. Retirement. Abiding in the self is solitude, because there is nothing alien to the self. Retirement must be from some one place or state to another. There is neither the one nor the other apart from the self. All being the self, retirement is impossible and inconceivable. Abhayasa is only the prevention of disturbance to the inherent peace. You are always in your natural state, whether you do abhayasa or not. To remain as you are without question or doubt is your natural state. Does one not obtain siddhis also? In order to display siddhis, there must be others to recognize them. That means there is no jnana in the one who displays them. Therefore, siddhis are not worth a thought. Jnana alone is to be aimed at and gained. Does my realization help others? Yes, and it is the best help that you can possibly tender to others. Those who have discovered great truths have done so in the still depths of the self. But really, there are no others to be helped. For the realized being sees only the self, just as the goldsmith sees only the gold, while valuing it in various jewels made of gold. When you identify yourself with the body, name and form are there. But when you transcend the body consciousness, the others also disappear. The realized one does not see the world as different from himself. Would it not be better if the saints mix with others? There are no others to mix with. The self is the only reality. Should I not try to help the suffering world? The power that created you has created the world as well. If it can take care of you, it can similarly take care of the world also. If God has created the world, it is His business to look after it, not yours. Is it not our duty to be patriots? Your duty is to be and not to be this or that. I am that I am sums up the whole truth. The method is summarized in be still. And what does stillness mean? It means destroy yourself, because every name and form is the cause of trouble. I is the self. I am this is the ego. When the I is kept up as the I only, it is the self. When it flies off at a tangent and says, I am this or that, I am such and such, it is the ego. Who then is God? The self is God. I am is God. If God be apart from the self, He must be a selfless God, which is absurd. All that is required to realize the self is to be still. What can be easier than that? Hence, Atma Vidya is the easiest to attain. Guru and His grace. What is Guru Kripa? How does it lead to self-realization? Guru is the self. Sometimes in his life a man becomes dissatisfied with it and not content with what he has. He seeks the satisfaction of his desires through prayer to God, etc. His mind is gradually purified until he longs to know God, more to obtain His grace than to satisfy his worldly desires. Then God's grace begins to manifest. God takes the form of a guru and appears to the devotee, teaches him the truth, and moreover purifies his mind by association. The devotee's mind gains strength and is then able to turn inward. By meditation it is further purified, and it remains still without the least ripple. That calm, expanse, is the self. The guru is both external and internal. From the exterior, he gives a push to the mind to turn inward. From the interior, he pulls the mind towards the self and helps in the quieting of the mind. That is Guru Kripa. There is no difference between God, Guru, and the self. In the Theosophical Society, they meditate in order to seek masters to guide them. The master is within. Meditation is meant to remove the ignorant idea that he is only outside. If he be a stranger whom you await, he is bound to disappear also. Where's the use for such a transient being like that? But as long as you think you are separate or that you are the body, so long is the master without also necessary. and he will appear as if with a body. When the wrong identification of oneself with the body ceases, the master will be found as none other than the self. Will the guru help us to know the self through initiation, etc.? Does the guru hold you by the hand and whisper in the ear? You may imagine him to be what you are yourself, because you think you are with the body. You think he also has a body to do something tangible for you. His work lies within, in the spiritual realm. How is the guru found? God, who is immanent in his grace, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests himself according to the devotee's development. The devotee thinks that he is a man and expects a relationship as between two physical bodies. But the guru, who is God or the self incarnate, works from within, helps the man to see the error of his ways, and guides him in the right path until he realizes the self within. What should the devotee do then? He has only to act up to the words of the master and work within. The master is both within and without, so he creates conditions to drive you inward and at the same time prepares the interior to drag you to the center. Thus, he gives a push from without and exerts a pull from within, so that you may be fixed at the center. You think that the world can be conquered by your own efforts. When you are frustrated externally and are driven inwards, you feel, oh, there is a power higher than man. The ego is like a very powerful elephant, which cannot be brought under control by any less powerful than a lion, which in this instance is no other than the guru, whose very look makes the elephant-like ego tremble and die. You will know in due course that your glory lies where you cease to exist. In order to gain that state, you should surrender yourself. Then the master sees that you are in a fit state to receive guidance, and he guides you. How can the silence of the guru, who gives no initiation, nor does any other tangible act, be more powerful than his word, etc.? How is such silence better than the study of scriptures? Silence is the most potent form of work. However vast and emphatic the scriptures may be, they fail in their effect. The guru is quiet, and grace prevails in all. This silence is more vast and more emphatic than all the scriptures put together. But can the devotee obtain happiness? The devotee surrenders himself to the master, and it means that there is no vestige of individuality retained by him. If the surrender is complete, all sense of self is lost, and then there can be no misery or sorrow. The eternal being is nothing but happiness. That comes as a revelation. How can I obtain grace? Grace is the self. That also is not to be acquired. You only need to know that it exists. The sun is brightness only. It does not see darkness. Yet you speak of darkness fleeing on the sun's approach. So also the devotee's ignorance, like the phantom of darkness, vanishes at the look of the guru. You are surrounded by sunlight. Yet if you want to see the sun, you must turn in its direction and look at it. So also grace is found by the proper approach you make, though it is here and now. Cannot grace hasten ripeness in the seeker? Leave it all to the master. Surrender to him without reserve. One of two things must be done. Either surrender yourself because you realize your inability and need a higher power to help you, or investigate into the cause of misery. Go into the source, and so merge in the self. Either way, you will be free from misery. God or Guru never forsakes the devotee who has surrendered himself. What is the significance of prostration to the Guru or God? Prostration signifies the subsidence of the ego, and it means merging into the source. God or Guru cannot be deceived by outward genuflections, bowing and prostrations. He sees whether the ego is there or not. Will not Bhagavan give me some prasad from his plate as a mark of his grace? Then what you eat becomes Bhagavan's prasad. Is not the literate man better qualified for enlightenment in the sense that he stands in no need of Guru Kripa? Even a learned man must bow before the illiterate sage. Illiteracy is ignorance, and education is learned ignorance. Both are ignorant of the true aim. The sage is ignorant in a different line. He is ignorant because there is no other for him. Is it not to obtain the Guru's grace that presents are offered to him? So the visitors offer presents to Bhagavan? Why do they bring presents? Do I want them? Even if I refuse, they thrust the presents on me. What for? Is it not like giving a bait to catch the fish? Is the angler anxious to feed them? No, he is anxious to feed on the fish. Is the theosophical idea of giving successive initiations before attaining moksha true? Those who attain moksha in one life must have passed through all the initiations in their former lives. Vyasavi says that jnanis after death have to choose 4 or 5 lines of work, not necessarily in this world. What is Bhagavan's opinion? Some may take up work, but not all. Are you conscious of a brotherhood of invisible rishis? If invisible, how can you see them? In consciousness. There is nothing external in consciousness. Can I realize them? If you realize your own reality, then that of the rishis and masters will become clear to you. There is only one master, and that is the self. Is reincarnation true? Reincarnation exists only so long as there is ignorance. There is really no reincarnation at all, either now or before, nor will there be any hereafter. This is the truth. Can a yogi know his past lives? Do you know the present life that you wish to know the past? Find the present, then the rest will follow. Even with our present limited knowledge, you suffer so much. Why should you burden yourself with more knowledge? Is it to suffer more? Does Bhagavan use occult powers to make others realize the self, or is the mere fact of Bhagavan's realization enough for that? The spiritual force of self-realization is far more powerful than the use of all the occult powers. Inasmuch as there is no ego in the sage, there is no others for him. What is the highest benefit that can be conferred on you? It is happiness, and happiness is born of peace. Peace can reign only when there is no disturbance, and disturbance is due to thoughts that arise in the mind. When the mind itself is absent, there will be perfect peace. Unless a person has annihilated the mind, he cannot gain peace and be happy. And unless he himself be happy, he cannot bestow happiness on others. Since, however, there are no others for the sage who has no mind, the mere fact of his self-realization is itself enough to make the others happy. Peace and happiness. How can I get peace? I do not seem to obtain it through vichara. Peace is your natural state. It is the mind that obstructs the natural state. Your vichara has been made only in the mind. Investigate what the mind is, and it will disappear. There is no such thing as mind apart from thought. Nevertheless, because of the emergence of thought, you surmise something from which it starts and term that the mind. When you probe to see what it is, you find there is really no such thing as mind. When the mind has thus vanished, you realize eternal peace. Through poetry, music, japa, bhajana, the sight of beautiful landscapes, reading the lines of spiritual verses, etc., one experiences sometimes a true sense of all unity. Is that feeling of deep blissful quiet, wherein the personal self has no place, the same as the entering into the heart of which Bhagavan speaks? Will practice thereof lead to a deeper samadhi, and so, ultimately, to a full vision of the real? There is happiness when agreeable things are presented to the mind. It is the happiness inherent to the self, and there is no other happiness, and it is not alien and afar. You are diving into the self on those occasions which you consider pleasurable. That diving results in self-existent bliss, but the association of ideas is responsible for foisting that bliss on other things or occurrences, while in fact that bliss is within you. On these occasions you are plunging into the self, though unconsciously. If you do so consciously, with the conviction that comes of the experience that you are identical with the happiness, which is verily the self, the one reality, you call it realization. I want you to dive consciously into the self, into the heart.